I appreciate that many people, millions of people, according to the opinion polls, well over half still of people polled are still broadly supportive of the current regime, or at least of the current leader. I'm never quite sure how to separate those two things. So the old Trumpian observation about being able to shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote has sort of come home to roost on a scale that I suspect even the Orange Man-child never could have imagined. You now have it was about 6 months after he was hospitalised. He was in intensive care with coronavirus after just shy of 60,000 people had died from it. You have the Prime Minister telling his closest advisors and his key allies that he didn't really buy the idea that the NHS could be overwhelmed, and he'd gone off the idea of lockdowns. This reportedly caused a 6-week delay last autumn between when the scientists wanted it to be done and when Boris Johnson finally accepted that it needed to be done after, as I say, opining, and it's on the record this, Cummings has released the receipts, so to speak. I told you a while ago, didn't I? It would all depend on what receipts he'd kept. His word versus Johnson's word it's an almost laughably inadequate tension now, isn't it? It's who are you going to believe, Dominic Cummings or Boris Johnson? The bloke who stuck the lie on the side of the bus or the bloke who drove it? I mean, it really is an incredible challenge that you've got there. So it was all going to depend on the receipts. But of course, the Fifth Avenue principle teaches us that even if he's kept the receipts, it doesn't really matter. Doesn't it? Even if he's kept the receipts, it doesn't really land. I suppose you've got the Dominic Cummings precedent with regard to Barnard Castle, but this latest development showing that he was sort of subscribing to the idea that because the average age for people who died was in the low 80s, then somehow lockdowns were unnecessary and we could just sacrifice the maximum of 3 million people in this country aged over 80 in order to ensure that everybody else could go about their business. Now, the weirdest bit of this is the fact that 6 months before he'd been put into intensive care himself with a very, very serious case of coronavirus. That's the bit I can't quite compute. You come out of hospital. I think one of the nurses that he praised for looking after him has already left the country as a result of what I suppose we'd have to call the hostile environment. But you're banged up in ICU with a really severe, life-threatening case of coronavirus, and 6 months later, you're saying to your closest buddies, "Oh, I don't buy this nonsense about the NHS being overwhelmed," and also, never mind the lockdowns. It's only the really old people that are dying. Let's just let it rip through the population and see what happens. Let the bodies pile high. That phrase has never been denied either. But I can't believe it. I guess I don't talk about much anymore outside work. I kind of talk about the weather like you do and the tennis until quite recently and obviously the football. So sometimes I get to work and I get my ducks in a row at 10 o'clock in the morning and I can't quite believe the quacking. I genuinely can't believe the quacking. So that little throwaway line just there, let the bodies pile high, which was among Dominic Cummings' previous revelations, never been denied. And to date, they haven't denied all of it. They've denied everything that isn't written down, in the same way that they'd steal everything that isn't nailed down. So what you have today is this. He wrote this. Hardly anyone under 60 goes into hospital, but he did. And of those, virtually all survive, and I no longer buy all this NHS overwhelmed stuff. We will, I suspect, this hour take some calls from people working in the NHS to tell me whether last October, I think it was, were you buying the idea that the NHS could be overwhelmed when you were up to your ears in coronavirus cases? How can he come out of an ICU ward and 6 months later start claiming, it's almost as if he's claiming that black is white, right? That the moon is made of cheese, that the earth is flat. So we'll have a look at that. And I mean, if you have been seduced into the fetishizing flags and the prioritizing statues over human beings, if you've fallen for that school of thought lately, then how do you feel about the fact that he was planning to go off and infect the Queen? Potentially. Are you cool with that as well? Because that's also in Dominic Cummings' latest revelations. 18th of March last year, according to Cummings, the Prime Minister said, "I'm going to see the Queen. That's what I do every Wednesday. Sod this. I'm going to go and see her." Cummings claims he intervened, pointed out that he could infect her, at which point Or he added, I just said to her, if you give her coronavirus and she dies, what are you going to do? You can't do that. You can't risk that. That's completely insane. And the Prime Minister said he basically just hadn't thought it through and then said, yeah, you're right, I can't go. I struggle for words. Unfortunately, it's my job to come up with them. But this is just absolutely unbelievable.